We are so glad you decided to join us this morning online. We really just want to connect with anyone that's watching this, and so we wanted to make sure to point out two main important things, ways you can know what's going on at TFBC. First off, you could always go to our website, tularefbc.org. You could find different events, learn a little bit about our church, what we believe, our staff, all those things. You can find that on our church website. So please make sure you check that out. But really the best way to stay connected with everything we have going on is to simply download the Tulare First Baptist Church app. So if you go on the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, you should be able to find it. And through the app, we do have an events page. Again, all of our events are right there. There's ways to sign up for different events we have on there. There's ways to connect with us, such as just reaching out to the church office. It does have ways to call us, but also just message us through the app. We also do have, you can read the Bible through our app, and there's times we have different Bible reading plans. Sometimes they actually coincide with the sermon series. Just a lot of great things on that app. We would not want you to miss out with what we have there, so please make sure you download that and just make sure you connect with us in some way. Obviously, it is harder to connect with you through just a video, so we would love for you to reach out and just let us know how you're doing. Let us know how we can minister to you in any way possible. I'm excited to get to hear the message this morning and just see what God has to teach us.
And I'm one of the pastors at Neighborhood Church in Visalia, just a few miles away. And it's so good to be hanging out with you here today because TFBC is actually kind of a home away from home for myself and my family. My wife, Kara, actually works here in the office during the week. And you might have seen her up here a few months ago. She was hosting your last Family Sunday. And then you might not actually know this, but for the past 5 years or so, I've been doing all your graphic design. So sermon series, bulletins, all that good stuff. Yeah. So this really feels like home away from home. We feel like we're a part of this community too. So thank you so much for having us, and thank you so much for hosting me here today. Now, today we're going to be continuing our latest teaching series we've been on. It's called Life Ahead. Proceed with wisdom. But before we jump in this morning, I want to ask you a question. We're going to get interactive. I want to see by a show of hands, how many of you have ever said something before that you regretted? It's a lot of hands, a lot of hands. 2 hands up right here, 2 hands up right here. I love the honesty and humility in this room this morning. It's palpable, I can feel it. We all have embarrassed ourselves before. We've all said things, the wrong thing at the wrong time. We've all had those moments where we didn't think before we spoke, moments that really haunt us again and again throughout our lives. Now, let me ask you another question. You don't have to raise your hand for this one, but has this ever happened to you? You're winding down for the day. You're heading to bed for the evening. You've brushed your teeth. You've thrown on your PJs. You've said your prayers. You get under those blankets. You turn the lamp off. You lay your head on the pillow, and you start to remember every embarrassing thing you've ever said in your entire life on loop. It's like those sports bloopers on ESPN. They play over and over again, except it's every social blunder you've ever made. It's the conversational awkwardness. It's the relational follies. This happens to me all the time when I'm laying in bed. It's like hearing a bad song on loop. Just all these embarrassing things haunting me in my dreams. We've all been embarrassed by things we've said. We've all said things we regret. Our words can get us into trouble. For example, I had a friend who told me this really embarrassing story at one time. She goes to a wedding, and one of her close friends is a bridesmaid in this wedding. And after the ceremony, they catch up at the reception, and she goes up to her friend, the bridesmaid, and says, "Oh my goodness, friend, you are so gorgeous. You know what? You better be careful, or you're going to upstage the bride. You're 10 times as pretty as she is." All of a sudden, she looked, and the bridesmaid had this horrified look on her face. She turns around, and who was there? The bride was standing right behind her. Ooh, that's awkward. But I can one-up it. I had another friend. He told me this story. He worked in an office with a woman who was pregnant. Now, you can already see where this one's going. Love this friend. He's not the smartest person. Walks up to this woman and asks the question that you should never, ever, under any circumstances, ever ask a woman. He said, "Hey, coworker, so when's the baby due?" She looked at him with a confused face and said, "What are you talking about? I had the baby 3 months ago." Ooh, that's a bad one. Now, I personally love watching my friends embarrass themselves. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy on the inside, but if I'm being honest, it's only because I'm the worst of all. I really struggle to think before I speak sometimes, and there's been many times I've put my foot in my mouth. For example, this was super embarrassing. Years ago, I was driving home. I was a teenager still living with my parents. Driving into our neighborhood late at night, I pull into the driveway, and I look around and there's all these people wandering around the block. And I find this odd because it's late at night, and some of them are wearing orange vests, they've got headlamps and flashlights, some of them have GPS equipment, and it was an odd sight, so naturally my curiosity got the better of me. And I wandered over to this group without thinking. I just loudly asked, "Hey, what are you guys up to? Is this like a scavenger hunt or a party? It looks like you're having a lot of fun." This guy looks at me with this super serious face and he goes, "No, we're looking for a missing child." Oh, that was embarrassing. And before you get offended, they found the child. The child was okay. I'm allowed to tell that story in church. But what an embarrassing moment, right? What a reminder that maybe I should think before I ask my dumb questions. Now, let me one-up that with one more story before we get started. This is fantastic. When I was 17 years old, I had a very glamorous job working at Old Navy at the South Hill Mall in Puyallup, Washington. As you can imagine, working in retail led to many awkward encounters, but there's one in particular that takes the cake. I was out there on the sales floor with my little Old Navy headset on, folding piles of denim that customers had just thrown all over the floor because, that's what you do when you go to Old Navy or Ross, right? You just start throwing the clothes in the aisles. Have you ever been to a Ross before? It looks like a war zone. Anyways, I digress. So I'm out there, and this older gal approaches me, and she was looking for a particular size in a certain garment. She wasn't able to find it on the sales floor. I said, "Well, no worries, ma'am. I'll go check the stock room. I'll get you sorted out." I go back to the stock room, and sure enough, we're completely out of that size. So I come out, and I break the news, and you would have thought I was breaking the news about a family member had passed away. This lady was very, very upset, and she became very verbally abusive. She started berating me and insulting me, and for whatever reason, accused me of body shaming her. I didn't even know what that meant at the time. Now, this may seem like extreme behavior, but for those of you in the room who have worked retail before, come on, interactions like this are just a normal Tuesday afternoon. So this lady ends her rant. She walks away, and I've got to admit, I was feeling pretty offended. So I stomped back to the fitting room where my coworker and friend Jessica was working. And I immediately began to tell her of this terrible interaction I just had with this horrible customer. And if you can believe it, my language was very colorful. The insults were flying. The swear words were pouring out of my mouth like a fire hydrant as I absolutely eviscerated this rude customer behind her back. It was at this very moment that the fitting room door in front of me slowly opens to reveal who else but the very same customer I had just been insulting. Oh no. The awkward silence was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. Her face slowly began to tremble and turn red and fill with rage. And she looks at me and she says, "I just heard everything you said. I want to talk to your manager right now, mister." Now, at that point, I had two options. Option A, I could apologize to this customer, try and smooth things over, take the humble route. But then there's also option B, which is to double down. Now, which option do you think I took? If you guess B, you're correct because I live my life by one motto, and it's always double down. I looked back at her and I said, listen, I'm glad you heard everything I said because you're a terrible person and I'm not sorry. If I had a microphone, I would have dropped it on the floor of that fitting room. And here's the craziest part about that story. I didn't get fired. Isn't that unbelievable? I was like, so I'm fired, right? They're like, oh, no, we'll see you tomorrow. Apparently, the staffing standards at Old Navy were not super high at the time. Now, you might be wondering, Jordan, that's funny and all, but what do these stories have to do with our current teaching series? Well, like I said, we're in this series, Life Ahead, Proceed with Wisdom. Isn't that a good-looking graphic up there? I just got to say, come on. The way the yellow just pops off the screen. You guys got talented people working for you. All month long, we've been getting very practical. We're opening up Scripture to explore God's wisdom for our lives. And I'm super relieved about series like this because life is complicated. And it seems more complicated than ever lately. So I think we need all the help we can get. So today I want us to jump back into the Old Testament. We're taking a look at a collection of ancient Hebrew wisdom called Proverbs. And despite its age, this thing is thousands of years ago, this book, this collection of wisdom literature has been a huge influence on the church throughout history, going all the way back to the first century as the authors of the New Testament quoted it over and over again. And this morning, I want to share with you a verse, a proverb more specifically, that has continued to challenge me over the years. And what you'll find is it's not long, it's not complicated, it's easy to understand, but boy, is it difficult to put into practice. Without further ado, here it is. If you got your bulletin, your Bible, we'll throw it on the screen. Proverbs chapter 17, verse 28. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. We just did a series at Neighborhood Church called This Verse Changed My Life. Believe it or not, this is the verse I chose that changed my life. It's short, it's sweet, it's a little sarcastic, which I like. It's a little tongue-in-cheek. The author of Proverbs had a sense of humor, but I think this is so important for us to understand. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. Listen, throughout the Old and New Testament, if you study your Bible, one thing becomes abundantly clear, and it's this: our words matter. Our words matter. Now, as a young man who just told you all those embarrassing stories, a man who struggled to think before speaking, someone who constantly is saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, this idea was and is a complete game changer for my life. Even today, this proverb reminds me that silence is preferable to a slippery tongue. And when I say slippery tongue, I mean the insults. I mean cursing others. I mean the gossip at the water cooler at work, the slander, fighting online, hot takes on social media. Our words, we can use them to belittle others, to tear people down, to destroy and profane other people made in the image and likeness of God. Our words can cut like a knife that leaves scars on our victims for years to come. Now, have you ever heard the nursery rhyme Sticks and Stones? It's pretty familiar, right? In the year 1830, the author Alexander William Kinglake first published this little rhyme that became famous throughout history. He wrote it to help school children become more resilient when it came to bullying. It goes like this: sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never harm me. Now, as popular as this little rhyme is, I think we can all agree it is far from the truth. Words do hurt. I love Eugene Peterson's translation of Proverbs 15:4, which actually says the opposite of this rhyme. It says, kind words heal and help, cutting words wound and maim. We can use our words to wound and maim others. Don't raise your hand, but how many of you can remember hurtful things that were said to you? Things that were maybe even years ago, decades ago. Things that have profoundly influenced your life in a negative way. I think we all have those stories. Our words matter. The author Abraham Heschel once said, "Our words create worlds." It's very profound, actually. Our words create worlds. And so throughout my life, as I've been challenged by scriptures and proverbs like we're reading today and in this series, I start to wonder this question. What kind of world am I creating with my words? What kind of world are you creating with your words? I think this is a question we should ask ourselves. Am I using my words to build up others and encourage others? Or am I using my speech to manipulate and coerce and bully other people? I think we should all be asking these questions continuously. But the problem is it's so much easier just to run our mouth, right, than to practice self-discipline or self-awareness. We live in a hyper-verbal world. In fact, language is one of the defining characteristics of humanity. To speak is to be human. I have this old Pink Floyd album. Any classic rock fans in the house today? Pink Floyd, this guy's going, nope. I am not a classic rock fan. Still love you, sir. So I have this album, and there's this song. It's called Keep Talking. And in the beginning of the song, they play a quote from the legendary physicist Stephen Hawking. It's interesting. Let's read it. The quote says this: "For millions of years, mankind lived just like the animals. Then something happened which unleashed the power of our imagination. We learned to talk, and we learned to listen. Speech has allowed the communication of ideas, enabling human beings to work together to build the impossible. Mankind's greatest achievements have come about by talking, and its greatest failures by not talking. It doesn't have to be like this. Our greatest hopes could become reality in the future. With the technology at our disposal, the possibilities are unbounded. All we need to do is make sure we keep talking." Now, this is a bit of an optimistic quote. And whether or not you agree with Stephen Hawking's anthropology or evolution or whatever it is he's talking about, that's not really the point. The point is, humans are social creatures. Language is a part of being a human, for better, but also for worse. Now, Hawking said technology would be a platform for our words to take us into a wonderful utopia, but I'm still waiting for that utopia to show up because our problems have only been exacerbated by our speech, and our speech has only been exacerbated by technology and social media. At this time in history, we have the ability like never before to just say whatever we want to whomever we want without thinking. In a millisecond, we can hit a button on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, whatever, and just send our words across the world 7 times over. This is why we're struggling right now as a culture with things like cyberbullying and misinformation and hate speech, these algorithms that keep people trapped in echo chambers and fan the flames of division in our culture. Social media has just given a megaphone to some of the most toxic traits of humanity. So Pink Floyd and Stephen Hawking said, man, we just need to keep talking. But the author of Proverbs says, well, yes, but maybe let's slow down a bit. Maybe let's employ some wisdom and think before we speak. Maybe silence is preferable to all this foolish speech that is tearing our world apart. Many, many years later, after Proverbs was compiled, there was a leader in the early Christian church. His name was James. And James was the half-brother of Jesus. And he wrote a letter to the followers of Jesus in Jerusalem. And here's what he said about our words. James wrote, all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. James taught the earliest Christians that their words matter. And this is such an important lesson for the church today. A lesson that tragically we get wrong over and over again as the church, as the community of Jesus followers on this planet. It's so easy to get this wrong. I get an opportunity to work with a lot of young people and people who are new to the Christian faith. And in these conversations, I found that an overwhelming amount of people who leave the Christian faith do so because at some point they were hurt by something someone said in the church. Maybe you've experienced that at some point. Maybe at some point you've been part of a church community and someone's put their finger in your face and said, listen, you're a sinner. You're a backslider. You fake Christian. You harlot. You Jezebel. You abomination. Get your act together or you are going to burn in hell. Right? Now, these examples seem extreme to me. I can't imagine anyone actually having these conversations. But what's crazy is I talk to people every week who have had these words spoken over their lives. And I think this is an absolute tragedy because I don't think that type of language at all reflects the loving heart of the Jesus we follow. And yet I hear story after story of people who are grappling with church hurt, and it's always rooted in something somebody somewhere said to them. If you look throughout church history or even world history, you'll see that religion uses words as weapons. Religion can use words as a way to subjugate and control others, but that's really not what Jesus modeled for us. If you're familiar with the life of Jesus, if you've read the Gospels, the 4 biographies of Jesus in the New Testament, you'll know that's not how Jesus rolled. In fact, Jesus had strong words of his own for religious leaders who used their words as weapons. Listen to this moment. It's from the book of Matthew, and Jesus is rebuking these hypocritical religious leaders. And he hits them with an analogy, first of all. He says this to them. He says, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad. For the tree is known by its fruit. What does that mean, Jesus? Well, he explains. He says, you brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Underline that, circle that, highlight that, whatever it is you do. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. Jesus is saying, not only do our words matter, but our words actually give people a glimpse into the condition of our very souls. Let's pause for a second. Do you know what I hate so much? Smog checks. I hate smog checks. It seems like every time I go and I get the car registration, which costs an arm and a leg as is, oh, guess what? You got to go get a smog check. This means I have to take time out of my day to drive across town, to find a mechanic that's not going to rip me off, which is actually a daunting task because, believe it or not, I don't know much about cars. I took a year of auto shop and I can barely change a tire. I'm admitting it. I'm confessing it. So yes, a smog check is stressful to me. And I think everyone hates smog checks. They're expensive, they're inconvenient, and yet, to a degree, our air quality is dependent on them. Now, again, I'm no expert, but here's how it works. You go, smog check, they check the exhaust from your tailpipe to make sure it's putting out reasonable levels of smog or pollutants or whatever. So basically the idea is if your tailpipe is billowing black smoke, I mean, you roll in there with your 1992 Honda Accord and you're puffing black clouds of smoke, you're not going to pass smog. And it's also probably a sign that something's wrong with your engine. In the glamorous world of vehicle maintenance, your exhaust can tell you something about the health of your engine. Are you seeing this forced metaphor I'm trying to paint for you? This is what Jesus is saying about our words. if our words are a constant cloud of billowing black smoke that's creating this nasty smog, it's a guaranteed sign that something is wrong in the engine of our hearts. Anytime I find myself using abusive language, destructive language, I get this check in my spirit that reminds me, man, I need to check my heart. It's like a check engine light for your soul. Listen, whenever I gossip about others, trash talk, insult people, or weaponize my language in any way, it's always a red flag that something is wrong in my spirit. Likewise, whenever I meet a new friend or an acquaintance or a colleague, if I go onto their social media profile and I just see an endless stream of inflammatory language and trash talk and just antagonistic energy, that really tells me all I need to know about that person. In fact, I've heard countless stories of people who are interviewing for a job and it was going so well, but then the employer looked at their social media feed and went, I don't want to touch this person with a 10-foot pole. And they didn't get the job. How crazy is that? I think this is because of one inconvenient but indisputable truth. Whether we like it or not, there is a correlation between what we say and who we are. As Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. There's a correlation between what we say and who we are. Now, speaking of social media, I get on my knees every single morning, and thank God that when I was in high school, all we had was MySpace. Remember MySpace, Jonathan? Tom, he was everyone's friend. This was like the first social media platform. And I thank God this is all I had because they deleted MySpace at some point, which means all the stupid stuff I ever wrote as a teenager on the internet is now long gone. When they deleted MySpace, they deleted the most embarrassing years of my life, and I'm so grateful. Now, you might be wondering, well, how embarrassing could it have been, Jordan? Well, just take a look at my profile photo from when I was 16. Does this look like a person who has something good to say on the internet? Listen, just asking my friends or coworkers. I may look the same, but I am still that emo kid, deep inside, angsty. You know what my nickname is at Neighborhood Church? Seattle Sad. Because I'm from the Pacific Northwest. They call me Seattle Sad. Oh, don't be Seattle Sad. Real loving work environment we have up there. All the jokes aside and embarrassing photos of me aside, let's have a real conversation. Let's have a family conversation for a moment. If you're a follower of Jesus here in this room today, let's all agree to be mindful of what we post online. What you say matters, and whether you realize it or not, what you say on the internet matters. Let's all agree not to make Jesus look bad by posting toxic stuff online. This means don't say things online that you wouldn't say in real life. Don't be passive aggressive. Don't drop obnoxious hot takes on every single issue. And please, don't go into the comments of your Aunt B's Facebook post and get into fights. It's not a good look for you as a Jesus follower. It's not a good look for the church community. And it's not a good look on Jesus himself. Our words matter. And if we follow Jesus, our hearts should be aligned with his way of love and grace. And if our hearts are in sync with in love, then by extension, our words and our digital activity should be in sync with that posture as well. And really, I know these sermons are long and probably not going to remember a lot of this, but if you remember one thing, I want you to remember this quote from the revered theologian, Thumper. He's a rabbit. He's from Walt Disney's Bambi, and he said this: if you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all. As a person who's struggled with a motor mouth, the Christian ethic has been a helpful source of inspiration and challenge in my life. I mean, I can't help but chuckle when I read this proverb, but let's throw it on the screen again. Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. You don't even have to be wise. You can just be considered wise by keeping your mouth shut. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent. Now, even Scripture can be a bit tongue-in-cheek, right? This is a bit of hyperbole. As much as we'd all love to move to a monastery and wear brown robes and take a vow of silence and live that Nacho Libre lifestyle, at some point we all need to be talking. Nobody's perfect, so how can we be better? How can we make incremental changes? How can we move closer towards Jesus with our words? Well, it's right there. We need to be students of the way of Jesus. We need to be intimately acquainted with his ways, with his ethics, with his lifestyle. In our actions, words, and our lifestyle should really be a reflection of his divine love. But speaking more specifically, I think we just need to be mindful of our words. That's really our theme for the morning. We need to think before we speak. And in fact, I want to share this morning 4 things you should be mindful of before you speak. When it comes to our words, we should be mindful of these 4 things: what we say, how we say it, when we say it, and where we say it. If you can run your thoughts and emotions and your speech through these 4 filters, I think your life will improve significantly. Your relationships will improve. Your workplace relations, all of it will improve. So first, it's obvious, right? We should be mindful of what we say. Is this helpful or harmful? Is this constructive or destructive? Is there a purpose to my words, or am I just spewing hot air into the atmosphere? Am I being honest? Am I being accurate? Do I even know what I'm talking about? These are questions we should be mulling over in our heads. I can remember back to my elementary school days, we had this little poster on the wall that said this, super cute. Before you speak, think. T, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? K, is it kind? This little kindergarten poster is actually really, really profound if you think about it. Imagine if Mark Zuckerberg and all his Silicon Valley cronies invented an algorithm that filtered every social media post on this criteria. I think society would turn into utopia overnight. I don't think that more realistically social media would crash and burn as we know it. We need to think about what we say. That much is obvious. But we can't stop there. We also need to be mindful of how we say what we say. Your tone matters. Your posture matters. Saying the right thing with the wrong attitude can be just as destructive. Have you ever met someone before who described themselves as being brutally honest? You know, you have that person who has that friend, oh, that's so-and-so, they're just brutally honest. Really, that's just a nice way of saying someone's a jerk, right? The Apostle Paul once wrote that we should speak the truth in love. Speak the truth in love. It's a helpful reminder that we should be mindful not just of what we're saying, but how we're saying it, especially if it's in a difficult conversation. Sadly, a lot of times church people can read that and think, oh man, well, that means I can say whatever I want as long as I say it in a nice, polite way. Well, that's not really what it means to speak the truth in love. Speaking the truth in love means truly thinking about and evaluating your communication style. It's asking questions like, how can my tone and posture create the best outcome for everybody in any given situation, regardless of the subject matter? How can I best reflect the love of Jesus in this conversation, even if it's a conflict, even if there's a disagreement? How can we carry ourselves in a way that reflects the love of Jesus? We should be mindful of what we say, how we say it. But sometimes, speaking the truth in love just means knowing when not to speak. We should also be mindful of when we say it and where we say it. And I love this quote on the screen. There's a 17th century French philosopher named Voltaire. He was not a big fan of Jesus, but he said something I found intriguing. He wrote, everything you say should be true, but not everything true should be said. Everything you say should be true, but not everything true should be said. The right thing said at the wrong time and place is the wrong thing to say. This means you probably shouldn't wrestle with marital issues in the kitchen while your kids are right there. It means you probably shouldn't give your substance abusing friend a intervention in mixed company. If you are a business owner or leader, you probably shouldn't chastise and individually correct your employees at an all-staff meeting for everybody to see, right? You probably shouldn't rush to tell your grieving friend, someone who's just lost a loved one, you shouldn't rush in to say, hey, everything's going to be all right, God has a plan. Even the right thing said at the wrong time can be hurtful. It can be the wrong thing to say. Our words, they matter. I don't think we realize how much of an impact our words have on this world. So as faithful followers of Jesus, those who want to walk in his way of love, those of us who want to build his kingdom here on earth, we should be mindful of what we say, how we say it, when we say it, and where we say it. As a person who regularly puts his foot in his mouth, I'm really preaching at myself this morning. There's so many things I've said to people I wish I could take back. There's things I said last week I wish I could take back. There's days when my words have been like beautiful music, encouragement, affirmation, love, even productive conflict. But then there's times when just everything I say is just like exhaust, like this toxic smog that's just choking everybody out. As I was preparing this week, I had to wonder, what would our world be like if we got this right? How would our world change? How would our state, our community, our city, even just our church family here in Tulare, how would things change if every follower of Jesus would stop weaponizing their words? How would our community change if we made a radical commitment to civility? It's not hard, right? Just being civil with one another. What if we truly began to understand the weightiness and impact of our speech on others? As the proverb suggests, I think for a while we'd all probably be a little bit quieter. As we wrap up this morning, I want to leave you with a thought from the author, Benjamin Barber. He said this. He said, civility is a work of the imagination. For it's through the imagination that we render others sufficiently like ourselves for them to become subjects of tolerance and respect, if not always affection. I think regardless of what you believe, civility should be the gold standard in our culture, right? But here's the thing. If you made the decision to follow Jesus, this is the ground floor. This is basement level. We're called to build upon this. We're called to go beyond civility and love in radical, life-giving ways that change our world. It's a big invitation. It's a weighty privilege and responsibility. None of us are going to get this right this side of eternity. But it's a challenge we've been given, something we can strive to as we seek to look more and more like Jesus each day. And in my own life, there's a question I like to ask myself, a question we say up in Visalia Neighborhood Church all the time. If you can't remember all the teachings of Jesus, if you can't, pull up Bible verses left and right, I think one question you can always ask yourself in any situation or circumstance, if you want to walk like Jesus, you just ask yourself this: what does love require of me? In every conversation, in every situation and circumstance, if you could just ask yourself this question, what does love require of me? I think the world would be a better place. Our words matter, so let's use them for good. Let me pray for us today.